It is on this day, September 20th, 2024, that I am 1 year on testosterone, which I honestly cannot believe. But I was looking at the pictures and it has, in fact, been 1 year. So, in this video, we're going to start off with the voice reading as per usual, but then instead, we're going to head into year-round changes rather than just this last month's changes. After that, I will talk about the last month's changes, which are actually significant this month, different than the previous months, so I would stay around for that if you have the time. And then I'm going to close off with how am I feeling. So, to get started, we'll do the voice reading. Shifting Tides, which is a poem that I wrote on my 3rd month of testosterone, is what I've been reading every month since then. So I'm going to go ahead and read that now. An inlet of rock and sand by the sea, it is I that you see. For many years the waves lapped against me. I shifted to greet them from time to time, but in others I was shy, hiding my coast. They were an expected presence, a constant in my youth. Slowly, though, I grew tentative of them. I asked the tide, why scrape at me? She answered nothing has changed. Surely something did, for now I feel pain. The waves grew taller all the same. In high tide I reshaped my front, while in low I was left to deliberate. Were allies brought to my tidal gates? Investigating a smooth shell one day, I thought he looked rather plain, but then a friendly claw turned him over, revealing rainbow swirls and tear-streaked truth. I was too quick to blame the tide, too naive to behold the moon. A cove is always changing shape, forming a haven in each wake. An inlet of rock and sand by the sea, it is I that you see. Oh man. I'm not feeling the most emotional right now, but just ahead of time, if I do cry, it's because, as you would expect, there are some feelings flying around. So, year-round changes. I tried to organize these in terms of, like, how significant the change is, but it's not exactly in order. But it's in a loose order of, like, how significant they are. So I think the first one, for me, is probably got to be the voice. And not just like getting deeper, but also voice cracks. I think voice cracks are now just the normal of my everyday life, and it affects what I can do in terms of like cheering and like woo and like stuff like that. Like it is a significant change, and it changes how I speak to everybody. So I would rate that as like the biggest change I've had in the last year, and I would say it has dropped. I go back and watch old videos, and this is not what that voice used to sound like. So, and I'm very happy with it. Like, I mean, we'll talk more when I talk about how am I feeling, but I'm very content with my voice, and like sometimes I own it and I go like even deeper, even though I really don't need to, and I don't feel the pressure to. Sometimes when I'm singing, but other times I'll go even higher, kind of back to the cadence I used to talk and whatnot. But I'd say I have like some of a range, and depending on how I'm feeling that day, I'll go a little higher, go a little lower. It depends on the day, but for the most part, my overall has moved down, and it is a lot harder for me to go higher now. Um, Again, my voice will crack, or if I'm like trying to cheer, there's a volume in which my voice just cuts off. Woo! The example that I used in previous videos was the Janet example referencing Rocky Horror, where she goes, oh, this is gonna sound so bad. Brad! Yeah, it's just the voice cracks every time. So it is funny. Like it's fun to make fun of with your friends. So that's kind of currently where that is at. I feel like I was going to make another point, and I already forgot what it was. But, yeah, I think the main limitation with that is, again, going to social events where it's loud. I can't raise my voice. I really can't raise my voice. It just cuts off. And so people cannot tell what I'm saying at functions. And so usually I type on my phone and then let them type what they want to say or, like, say the response. So, like, there are ways around it. But it is something to keep in mind. For those that are very like bar culture or like club culture-y, or concerts. It can be a lot harder, or it can like kill your voice for the next day and stuff like that. So things to keep track of in that regard. But I don't really go out that much, so that's not very applicable to me. The next thing I would say is facial hair, mostly because it's a visual thing, but more than just a visual thing, it's something I feel. And since it started really growing in, I keep touching it every day. So that's part of why I think it's second in terms of like how important it is to me, because I can't, since I've gotten it, I can't stop like rubbing my hands through it nonstop. It first started, if you go back and watch all the videos, it started with the little sideburns that grew like really, really long. And then it grew in this patch right here, which is happening right now. I just shaved like last week. And I've got this patch right here again. So this patch always grows in first, after the sideburns. And then it starts popping up like under my chin everywhere. And it starts growing in longer and longer. And eventually it reaches a length where I keep pulling it nonstop, and so I shave it down so that I stop pulling at it. But then instead I just rub through the little short hairs, which I got going right now. I don't want to get too close to the camera, but you can see. You might be able to see some of the short hairs here, and then down here. They're kind of everywhere. So I would say that is one of the next biggest ones. And it's also very significant in terms of my euphoria with gender, because facial hair was one of the things that got me a lot of dysphoria in the first place. I think the two big ones were bottom dysphoria and facial hair, and then top dysphoria, in that order. So I would say facial hair is a pretty important one to me. And when I was looking through the pictures I was choosing to make my 1 year on testosterone post on Instagram, which I just made, I found that it is one of the biggest visual changes you can tell from portraits of me. So I thought that would rank as second place. Third under that would be acne, because I've always battled acne, so that's part of why it's not number 1 or 2. But I definitely still dealing with it, and it is still a struggle. I will say, strangely, even though my facial acne is more centered down here, I used to have a lot more acne up here, and that's gone. And I don't know why. Like, I don't have a reason why. I just cut my hair, so it's not because I cut my hair. But I think I'm just very oily where the new facial hair is, and so that's where I'm getting the majority of the acne. And I'm working on that. I actually got some stuff to help with that, so hopefully that gets better. But my body acne, surprisingly, is better than when I started testosterone at this moment. There were definitely times that it was way worse, especially with stress. When you add stress and then school stress making me be less hygienic, and then add that to testosterone, that was a bad mixture. And that definitely happened throughout the school year last year. But throughout this summer, I was able to just keep on it, to the point that my shoulder and back acne, which has always been the worst throughout my whole life, is not bad right now. It's mostly the scars that are still there, which those aren't going to go away for a while. But it is mostly just those. So I'm actually feeling really good about that. And so I think that is very interesting. I think something to note is, it obviously depends on the individual, how your body will react, how much more acne you'll get, how much more oily you are. But just because testosterone can make you sweat more or whatnot, doesn't necessarily mean there's only one reaction your body will have. And there's not only one area you'll get acne, or like, it's not always that you'll get more acne, if that makes sense. Sometimes it changes the region in which you get it, or stuff like that. So, just some things to note. It depends on the individual, really, which is true for most testosterone things, honestly. Most hormonal things. Hormonal English. Next, a very obvious one for me as an individual is that my cycle went away, which I guess it was obvious the first month where it was gone, because I was like, where is it? Where is it? And then it didn't come, and I was so excited. Um, and I got so used to not having it that it just went in the back of my mind. I forgot it was a thing at all. And then it came back, which we'll talk about in the last month section. And thus, I think one of the biggest highlights of testosterone is that going away, because I hated that. I would love to live a life where that is no longer ever a thing. So, I think that one's a pretty significant one. And then I'd follow that up with sweat and body weight. I guess we'll do body weight first and then sweat. Body weight, my body weight gained a lot, but it also went down. So I think in like month 3 or 4, I got my weight checked. I'd have to go back to the video to check the specific values, but I thought, if I recall, I gained like 50 pounds, 40, 50, with a doctor scale, which people have told me various things about doctor scales. But I definitely gained a decent amount of weight, and then lo and behold, just a few weeks ago, actually a month ago, I got weighed again for my doctor appointment, and it's back down again. It's not all the way down where I started. I'm not that light still. I was actually almost a little underweight before I started testosterone, but now I'm pretty in the middle between the two. I still have gained something like 30 pounds, like 20 or 30 pounds, but not like 50. And there is definitely some muscular changes. I think the biggest muscular change I've had in terms of like how noticeable it is my calf. I think my calf like built itself like to an absurd degree, and it also affects like how I go through life, like not just in terms of like my lack of working out maybe not benefiting me with the amount of weight I've gained, but in terms of like how I can bend my body or how flexible I am. I think the biggest thing is that I can't kind of duck walk anymore. And I know I demonstrated this in another video, but I'll just do it now again. If I go back here, what I can't do is sit like this. This hurts now because my calf is like digging into my thighs, and my thighs are bigger too, but mainly my calf. Oh, ow. And so what that means is that I really just need to work on like both those entities. And I'm sure that men just get used to it, and maybe like that pain goes away for them. But for me it is painful. And so I try to avoid that stance as much as I can. So yeah, I actually talked to some cis men about it, and they were talking about how men often do that squat stance instead, maybe because of that. So I thought that was actually kind of interesting. I never would have thought about the way people pose as a result. I think that's also why men sit with their foot on their knee and not with their legs crossed, because when your legs are crossed with these larger thighs, and not that women don't have large thighs, I think it's just a different shape. But with my legs crossed with like this build that I now have, it's a little uncomfortable. Like more uncomfortable than it was before. And part of it is also, again, the calf on my knee. Y'all can't see, but like my calf is right on top. So yeah, I'm noticing some changes in terms of like the actual muscle, how it looks. When I was at my family reunions, some of my family members pointed out that I actually looked like muscular, which they were not expecting. I don't notice that much because I don't really eyeball it much, but it's probably, I would say it's different in a lot of places, not everywhere, but definitely a lot of places. Also, something I was curious about when I started testosterone is if this tattoo would stretch with the change of fat and muscle. And I wouldn't say it has. I would say it looks mostly the same size. So, just for those who are interested on like if a tattoo would be affected, I haven't seen my tattoo be affected currently. Now it is in this spot, but just things to note. I need to stop making that sound effects. So that's a lot of the topic I had there. I will say the fat has also redistributed mostly to the belly right here. And it does go outward, which men talk about a lot. I think there's been some changes in shape up here as well, and maybe a few other places. I think my hips are still noticeable to me. I would say that the fat leaving the hips hasn't really changed the fact that the bones stick out so much to me. So, something I've noticed personally. But I think that covers the majority of all that. Sweat is definitely a thing, especially when I work out. I notice that I'm a lot more sweaty. Or if there's just a genuinely hot day, I'm a lot more sweaty. And I do not like the feeling of sweat on my back. The back sweat and the thigh sweat. Oh, the thigh sweat. The thigh sweat was unbelievably bad this summer because I lived somewhere that was consistently 100 plus degrees Fahrenheit, and that was very unpleasant. So the sweat was definitely like a real thing, for sure. Body hair. I would say body hair was kind of a slow progression for the majority of the last year. I started off pretty hairy in particular spots. My legs were already at the length they are right now. But I guess the upper thigh and like the inside of the thigh wasn't hairy when I first started testosterone. I didn't have any back hair. I did have some stomach hair, but it was short stomach hair. It wasn't very long. No chest hair. I mean, there was like some individual hairs before I started testosterone, but like they were blonde. So there's this like thing that people talk about where AFAB people have like blonde or like very light hair. I definitely had that in the upper regions here in general. And then same thing with my mustache and previous sideburns before I started testosterone. They were like blondish. They grew, but it was like a very light color. Throughout the last year, I've gotten hair on my knees. My knees themselves didn't have hair before, but now there's hair like on top of my knees. I got hair on pretty much the entirety of my legs. I now have like 3 hairs each on my large toes, which I did not have before, which I've noticed. There's also like 6 hairs on top of my foot, which I also did not have before. Still not any back hair. That's not happened for me at all. I actually looked in the mirror just recently and I just didn't notice any. But I am getting some chest hair. Not a lot. Like really not a lot. But it is growing longer than it did before. And so that's more so what I'm noticing is the fact that it's long. And I'm slowly getting the stomach hair creeping up higher than it was before. But those are like the main body hair changes I've noticed. Also, I would say that pubic hair is longer than it grew before. Previously, I'll be very honest, I was never the kind of person to shave it because it hurts. If you have ever shaved your pubic hair and it grows to that little stabby short length, kind of like my facial hair right now, and it gets caught in your underwear and it like pulls out the hair, it hurts. So I didn't shave often as a result of that, and previously before testosterone, it never grew longer than the length it was. So I could just leave it alone and it wasn't like growing too long. But then starting testosterone, now it gets to the point where it's long enough that I actually have to do something. So I have noticed that as well. So those are all things to note. I haven't noticed much in the way of hair texture changes. It looks like there might be hair texture changes looking through the pictures I chose for the last year, but at the same time, part of the problem is that I took those pictures in various places with different humidity, and my hair twists or curls, especially when it's longer, when I'm in a humid environment. And so the pictures I took in Vegas and pictures I took in Texas were the ones that looked like I had a different hair texture. And I suspect that it is just because of the humidity. Because growing up as a kid, I always had that. My longer hair would start twisting at the bottom. So that is my suspicion, but we'll continue looking into it. I also have just a different hair care now than I had before, and that also can affect it. Um, but one of the things I was looking in, like, wondering if I would get is curly hair starting testosterone, and that has not happened. I have pretty straight hair still, pretty fine hair, like very. Let's see if I can get one. Very thin, like very, very, very thin hair, but it grows in like thick batches. It's a very weird hair texture. It's not the most common. It's really not the most common. It looks like a lot of other hair, but then you go to a hairstylist and the hairstylist is like, I don't really know how to deal with this, which I've had multiple times. Why can't I get one? Okay, there we go. Like, you're probably not even gonna be able to see it if I didn't just lose it. Well, that was a failure. I have very thin hair, is the point, and every time I go to a hairstylist, we don't quite know what to do with it. So this time around, we just cut it short, and we're just gonna see how it looks. I'm not hating it like right now. I'm pretty happy with it. Usually the day I get it cut, I'm very unsure of myself, and then like the weeks after, I start to figure it out. So, but I am gonna be growing it long again, to the length of my previous video. That's the plan. But we're just gonna start off here. A little off topic, but it's still related to testosterone. In terms of like balding and whatnot, I think my hairline is higher than it used to be. Period. Now, it is expected to have that happen. Most men have their hairline start at a higher spot than most women. Ow. I wouldn't say I've seen hairs falling out. Now, I have been talking to another trans friend of mine, and he has been having hair fall out. So, maybe like that is how it first arrives. I don't know. Neither of us know. He's getting tested for it. It's a whole thing. But I've not noticed it. It very well may be a thing. It may be a thing in the next few years. I have previously talked about the hair turning white in my family at an early age as well. That also might happen in the next few years. I'm not quite sure. But currently, in the last year, it's not something I have noticed. And for the most part, I'm focusing on things I've noticed. Talking about things I've noticed, we'll get to the TMI section, which we've referred to various times throughout the months. Bottom growth, I have noticed. It took a long time for me to notice, so that's why it's very low on the list. But I never... It's hard to explain. I didn't notice it as it was happening. I kind of just remember the before and the after. And I don't remember the before too well. I just know that it wasn't what it is now. I just remember one day being like, this is very different than it used to be. So, I don't know why I didn't register for so long. Probably in part because I wasn't paying attention to it. Because why would I? But it is definitely different now. And I wouldn't say it's like significant. It's not like I'm ready to get bottom surgery kind of size. However, it is enough that sometimes if I'm wearing tight underwear, which I don't have much tight underwear, but sometimes if I'm wearing tight underwear, it can be uncomfortable, feeling the underwear constantly against it. So just things to consider if you are going through that. Do note that some AFAB women already deal with that. Some AFAB women just have large things down there. And I think there are already underwear solutions for stuff like that. So I never looked into it because if it was bothering me, I'd usually go home and change. And everything would be fine. And then the other one would be atrophy. Atrophy down there is kind of noticeable. I feel like there's some months or some times it is worse than others. I might be wrong. I don't know. Probably. My guess would be that it depends on the time. It probably depends on what you eat and water and all these other factors, I'm sure. But there were a few times over the summer in particular that I felt really, really dry and raw. And that did not feel good when it did happen. And so usually I like went and used lube or something else to like get rid of that feeling because it is painful and we don't need to deal with painful things. Um, so that's my recommendation for that. But I wouldn't say it's common. I've not had it since I've moved here. It is possible that it's just because I lived in such a dry place or didn't take care of my body or that was just testosterone at the time. I don't know. There's all kinds of reasons that could have been true. Um, so really the takeaway I have is like how you respond to it. And if it's a consistent thing, you can always bring it up to your doctor. Typical thing to do. Anything else? I have not noticed any bump on my throat, which is probably a good thing. I don't want an Adam's apple, I'm not gonna lie. I don't want one. I just don't. So there's that. I can't think of much more. I think that covers a lot of the big changes over the last year. I think there are more changes to come, especially in regards to facial hair and some other things. Maybe we'll round out the voice cracks or whatnot, but currently I would say I've had a lot of changes, and all of this has been on gel testosterone, which a lot of people, I say a lot of people, but like a handful of people that I have seen on the internet / know of don't get much reaction to gel testosterone, and so they switch to shots. So I was always curious if gel would work out for me or if I'd have to switch, but it has been working really well for me personally, and I don't want to switch because I really, 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 really don't like needles, and it also just feels like a hassle. I realized that gel I have to do every night, and shots you only have to do weekly, but you still have to deal with disposing and getting your dosages and all that, so I'm pretty content with how everything has gone. With all that said, we'll get into just the last month. This will be actually very quick because I mostly only have 4 bullet points for the last month. But if you remember last video, I talked about how I was off testosterone for a month because I was moving and medication, and I couldn't get my medication because my doctor wasn't available. There's a lot of things going on. But I met with my doctor, got my prescription again, so I've been back on T for a month now. What is very noticeable in the last month, after being off T for a month, is that I had chest pain. And this is like AFAB first puberty kind of chest pain, like growth pain. It hurt. Like that, it just felt very sensitive and raw, and everything I did, like putting on clothes, jumping sometimes, like I'd feel it, and it's just like so many sensors are like flaring at the same time. It did not feel good. So I dealt with that for about a week, like seven-ish days, and I just kept being like super careful. I didn't bind. I actually bought a bra, my first bra in years, just to contain them, so I wouldn't feel clothes rubbing against them as much because it was just really, really hurting. So that was something I noticed. I don't know what can cause that. I don't know if it is estrogen. I don't know if it's something else. I'm not sure. I'll bring it up to my doctor when I meet with her next week. But that was definitely something I noticed for sure. My period did come back. That also really sucked. And significantly, it's notable that it is the longest period I've ever had by several days, like many days. So it was a very irregular one for me. And I haven't had one in a long time, so it was kind of crazy to have to deal with that and remember, like, oh, I gotta go buy stuff for that. So, and God, it's so expensive. It's so expensive. It's not okay how expensive those supplies are. Just saying. But, yeah, that was the longest I've ever had that happen. So that was very interesting. It also wasn't the same as usual in terms of like, how do you talk about this on the internet? The pattern it follows, if you know what I mean, didn't follow that. It was just completely different than usual. So very, very strange. Um, in the last month, I've noticed my body shape. Some of the things I've mentioned. Part of it's because I've been looking in the mirror more, and so I'm noticing a lot more of those things. Part of it is that I'm working out, so I'm noticing those things. There's some various reasons there, but in the last month, I would say I'm starting to notice like very, very specific body shapes I didn't have before. Not that those are like brand new developments, but I've noticed in the last month. And the last thing, one of the things that people talk about a lot with testosterone is like an increase in sex drive, like horniness or whatnot, caused by high testosterone. And throughout the months, I've mentioned like maybe having it, maybe not having it, not being sure. I think there's like once where I said for a week that I was like, I was very sure that I had it. This last month puts every time that I thought I had it in the fucking shadow because I had a spike in it last week. Like my first, I've never felt anything like that before. So last week, kind of like the last week and a half, really, my hormones were just like through the roof. Like they were just skyrocketed, and I didn't know what to do about it because I never ever felt anything like that before. I've never had to deal with anything like that before. I've never really had a drive like that before, ever. So it was kind of crazy to have that. And I wasn't the most successful at handling it. Like pretty much what ended up happening is my roommate and I ranted about it until it was over. But it's very, very noticeable in the last month. So I'm wondering if it has to do with the fact that I was off testosterone and then back on testosterone, that it just came flying in like that. Or if it's just coincidence, I don't know. But that is one of the most noticeable things in the last month, because it really puts all the previous times I've brought that up into perspective, because that's why I didn't include it in the year-round summaries, because I never felt anything like that. And this last week, like, stands out as its own thing. So that's it for the last month. I don't really have much to add on there. I really don't have much to add on there. And then, how am I feeling? Good question. I'm feeling pretty fantastic. Like, I'm feeling pretty fantastic. I haven't had dysphoria. Okay, that's actually a lie. I had dysphoria a few days ago, but it was self-induced dysphoria, so I don't even know if that counts. I purposefully caused dysphoria because the sex drive was driving me a little crazy, and I was trying to get rid of that, and so, yeah. I wouldn't recommend doing that, but it worked for me, so that's a whole side note. But I haven't been having dysphoria, like, pretty much at all, and I'm happy with, like, how society interacts with me at this current point. People still will ask me, like, what are your pronouns, because they're not quite sure sometimes what my pronouns are, especially before my haircut. And I'm perfectly fine with that. I have no problem with people expressing any confusion or, like, anything like that. Like, I'm fine with that. I don't need people to, like, be able to instantly know I'm a man. I don't care about that. It's more so getting distance away from being a woman that got me on this road in the first place. And I'm okay with people using they, them pronouns for me. I always have. When people ask my pronouns, I'll say he, him. But I'm really fine with they, them. I would say, out of all the trans men I know, I'm not the most masculine. And I'm not aiming to be super masculine, if that makes sense. Just, like, talking about, like, the big picture. I'm content looking like how I do now. I want, like, some more facial hair just because I like facial hair. And sometimes I don't like my top hair. And I think I would like my top hair more with facial hair. It's just something I felt for many, many, many years. Especially when I'm wearing hats. I don't like wearing hats and then seeing no hair. It kind of freaks me out. I think I look like an egg. Um, so that's part of why I want facial hair, so I can wear hats more. Things like that. Like they're very basic things. It doesn't affect my life the most, but I think I'd be maybe a little bit more confident. Um, but like that's really how I'm feeling regarding all that. I think the biggest thing is that oh, that was a weird voice crack. The biggest thing is that I don't like the shape of my body in general, and that's always been true. I just have a weird shaped back. I don't know how to explain it. I really don't. There's just maybe it's because my hips go out so far, like my hip bones go out so far that the back like is trying to compensate for it. I don't know. So that's the main thing I've been reflecting on now. One of the things that I noticed people were talking about before I started testosterone, when I was doing research on testosterone, is how the lack of dysphoria in some areas points out or brings out dysphoria in other areas. And I would say to some degree that that is true. I always had some level of like dysmorphia with my back, my lower back, and my hips. Um, and I think everything else being like really set and me just in general being happy is making me focus on those things a lot. And really, it doesn't matter as much. Um, to some degree, I just have a double standard for myself. Like, I'll find it fine on other people, but then hate it on myself. Um, to some degree, it's just because I want it to not be there. Recently, I've been doing dance, and I keep like I find myself thinking about like, what if it wasn't there? This dance would look so much better. Like things like that. It really comes down to social expectations. I shouldn't really need to feel that. I shouldn't really need to change my life as a result of it. So, I'm aware of those things, and I'm working through it at my own pace, really. Um, but even with all that, I wouldn't say that I'm feeling very upset about my body or whatnot. And I've definitely not had any breakdowns. I've not had any breakdowns about my body in a long, long time. I think my last one had to have been like in the spring, honestly. And that's a huge point of growth for me because I definitely had that before. I had several times the dysphoria would take me to the point of like a breakdown, crying, and everything. So I think it is an accomplishment to not be at that point anymore. And I think it is an accomplishment to be at the point where my whole extended family that I keep contact with, at this point now all uses my name and pronouns. And all my friends here at university use my name and pronouns. All my coworkers use my name and pronouns. So I'm at this point where I'm fully comfortably out. And I'm comfortably out to the point of not having to come out, if that makes sense. Um, Not necessarily passing, though we could argue that I can pass sometimes too. But to the point that I don't have to ever bring it up. I don't have to talk about being trans as a result of anything, or like bring it up to give context, or to explain why I don't like my voice or stuff like that. I used to explain to professors, like in discussion-based classes, like sometimes I won't be comfortable talking because I don't like my voice. I don't have to say that anymore because I do like my voice more than I did, and even when I don't like my voice as much that day, I can tolerate it a lot more than before. And so I don't feel the need to have to do those things anymore. Have to like explain to people like I'm trans and therefore blank. Sometimes I will say that my joints or whatnot are weak because of my medication, which is true. It's mostly me not working out enough that's the cause of that, but I can say that it's because I gained weight. But like other things like that, I would not say have affected me that much. So, feeling pretty good. Also, when I was at the airport, I did not get pulled aside for a search, which is very interesting. Part of the reason for that is that the airport that I am by actually now has gender non-identifying scanners now. Like, your gender doesn't affect the scanner, which is very interesting. Not all airports have that, though. The airport I flew back from didn't have that. I just wasn't pulled over that time. I did hear about other people who were, so there's that. But yeah, I'd say I pass pretty well. And if I ever feel the need to be more masculine, then I can. Sometimes I just put on a hat backwards, honestly, if I'm feeling it. I have some like minor debate about getting piercings. Almost every trans man I've ever known has a piercing. I can only think of one right now that doesn't. I have the fear of needles, as we mentioned before, so I don't really want to get one, if that makes sense. And more importantly, I don't know if I could take care of it, and that's part of why. But I don't know. It's a thought on my mind. Occasionally, sometimes. I think I'll just stick with tattoos, which there will be more. Excited. I have so many ideas, and it's hard to choose which one. But I'm still not intending to be the most masculine person. In fact, I want to be the kind of trans man that dresses femininely. I think I talked about that in some previous video. I don't know at what point, but I was talking about doing drag as a trans man, which the drag show is in a month, which is very scary. We'll see if the drag show shows up on this channel or not. But but I want to be able to like wear a corset and things like that. I want to be comfortable with femininity, but I do identify factually as a man, if that makes sense. Pretty much it's like, if I could choose how I was born, I'd probably go with a gay man. Like, your stereotypical gay man, but I'd be bi, if that makes sense. Be a man that does drag as a woman, if that makes sense. I think that would be my most ideal scenario. Or maybe like intersex. Born intersex with feminine chest, masculine lower bits, and just go from there. There's a lot of ways that intersex can pop up. You can do your own research on that. But like in general, something like that, I'd probably be happiest. So just giving some context into like my goals and how I'm feeling about things. I feel a pressure again to like lower my voice like extra. I can't do it right now. Extra deep, for no particular reason. I don't need to, and I still like screech and stuff like that. I'm like ah. It's just something that I do, and it is just part of my personality. So I don't have any like antagonism towards it. I think I'm rambling a little bit too much. It might be time to wrap it up. So overall, I'm feeling fantastic. I am excited to keep continuing testosterone for much more time. The cost has only been $10 recently, which is great. Don't have to deal with the $100 fee, which was a little annoying. Most people, it's way more expensive though. So, like, don't get me wrong, I'll take $100, but if it's $100 I don't need to be paying, that's a different story. And we'll have my last blood draw checkup this Monday, and we'll check my values. We'll see how much testosterone I'm at, which I don't actually know my number currently, and continue the journey onward to the next month. I think since it is year 2, I will still do monthly updates, and then after year 2 I'll do every 3 months, and then after year 3 I might just do yearly. That's my current plan. We'll see. I kind of want to do every 2 months, but that feels a little awkward. People don't usually do things in 2-month periods, usually. So I feel like it's either got to be monthly or 3 months. So we'll see. I'll ask my roommate about it. We'll see what ends up happening. I am pretty busy right now, so I know I've promised to do other videos several times now. And I did actually film one, and I just wasn't happy with it, so never posted it. Shocking. So no promises for the future, but I hope to work on things. I will admit that part of the reason why is because I'm my opinions are shifting on some things. I have a lot of videos on this channel, as I mentioned before, about asexuality and aro identities, and I am I was more confident on those identities before. I'm less now. I think things have just shifted a lot over the last year, and I just generally don't know what my identity is anymore. And so it's kind of hard for me to talk about those identities when I don't know what I am. I could talk about not knowing what you are being a valid thing, but it's kind of hard to have that discussion without someone guiding it, if that makes sense. So, not really sure what I'll talk on there. And upon reflection, there's not much for me to talk about regarding being trans in the workplace from this previous year either, or at school currently. I don't have much to talk about because all I'm really doing is just living my life. So, we'll see. We'll see. Maybe after the drag show, I can give advice for doing drag as a trans man, but it will be my first drag show, so it's not like I have much in the way of advice. But I'm also part of burlesque this year, and so I can talk about doing burlesque as a trans man. So, there's some things going on. We'll see. With all that said, hope you all have a good one. I'll see you all next time. Bye bye.